Good afternoon and welcome to the June 2nd, 2020 Technical Assistance Session on the CARES Act ESSER funding and district applications. All participants are in listen-only mode. This session is being recorded and the recording will be posted online. Participants are encouraged to ask questions via the chat box. Following today's session, the South Carolina Department of Education will review those questions and will begin adding responses to an FAQ document. The first portion of this session will provide an overview and program requirements for CARES Act ESSER funds, while the second portion will contain instructions on how districts must apply for these funds and financial requirements and information for district subgrantees. I'm now turning it over to John Payne, Deputy Superintendent of Federal Programs and Accountability, to begin.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining the CARES Act Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. We appreciate your time and attention. As our facilitator indicated, we are going to repeat some of the information that was shared on the morning session due to the fact that we exceeded our capacity for the number of attendees. So we will be covering some of the same information that we covered this morning. The purpose of these sessions is to provide an overview of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, and specifically the funds provided by it under the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief, or ESSER Fund, that will be awarded to school districts as subgrants. Our objectives in this overview is to provide you a basic understanding of current existing federal relief funds, for you to understand the ESSER funds, including the state's responsibilities as well as district responsibilities, to be familiar with the SCDE's subgranting process of these specific ESSER funds, to understand allowable uses of the ESSER funds, and lastly, to be prepared to apply for and implement these ESSER funds. Before we dive into the ESSER funds, we're going to talk specifically about some of the other pots of money that are going on and about the CARES Act in general. The CARES Act was signed into law on March 27, 2020, and provides over $30 billion to states for education-related expenses through an education stabilization funds. Of those $30 billion, there were funds that were sent to state educational agencies, these ESSER funds that I mentioned on the previous slide, and of this, South Carolina received a little over $216 million in funding. In addition, there were funds that were provided to each governor for educational need called the Governor's Education Emergency Relief, or GEER, funds. And with this pot of money, South Carolina received $48 million. Finally, the CARES Act provided $100 billion for states under the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And South Carolina, of that pot, received $1.9 billion. I wanted to display a visual representation since there are several pots of money swirling around, and it's important for you to understand the differences between these pots of money. Again, there is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was allocated to governors, with funds to be used to pay for expenses incurred due to or related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, South Carolina received $1.9 billion. The $48 million in GEER funds was authorized to governors with funds for higher education, school districts, or other education-related entities. And last, and the specifics of what we're talking about today, is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund that was given to state education agencies, of which we must flow 90% through to school districts. I will mention to you that as we go along, some of the information you're going to hear is going to sound repetitive, and that's intentional because we want to make sure that you are keenly aware of all the requirements of these funds and know basically everything that we know at this point. In terms of some general information about the CARES Act, the governor's application became available on April 14th, and the state application for the ESSER funds became available on April 27th. 2 days later, the Department of Education submitted its application, and 2 days after that, on May 1st, the U.S. Department of Education approved our application for these ESSER funds. The Coronavirus Relief Fund is the $1.9 billion pot that you may have heard about in the news or through the media or otherwise. And this is the one that Accelerate South Carolina, which is Governor McMaster's task force, has been convening and reviewing and has made recommendations with input from Accelerate Education. Our State Superintendent, Molly Spearman, is working with the Office of the Governor and the South Carolina General Assembly about potential dollars from this fund to support public education. Accelerate South Carolina has recommended the following for public school districts in terms of the money of the $1.9 billion. $47 million for academic recovery camps to be held this summer 2020. $160 million for 5 days of K-8 academic instruction, intervention, and social-emotional support. And $12 million for food service not reimbursed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and for cafeteria workers' salaries. It's important to note that these funds are one-time only, and this specific pot of money, the $1.9 billion, must be spent by December 2020. As we proceed working with the Governor and the General Assembly, more information about these funds will be forthcoming. The second pot, very briefly, I mentioned is the GEAR funds, and this is the money that was given directly to the Governor's office for education specifically. The Governor's office was awarded, as you can see, $48,467,924, and those funds must be used to support one or more of the following at the discretion of the Governor. They may be used for subgrants for the ongoing functionality to school districts significantly impacted by COVID-19. They may be in the form of subgrants for the ongoing functionality to institutes of higher education significantly impacted by COVID-19. Or they may be provided to support any other higher ed, school district, or education-related entity within the state that the Governor deems essential for carrying out emergency educational services. The Governor's office is leading this particular pot of money and will provide any additional information regarding these funds. So 2 separate pots of money. Let's now dive into the third pot of money, which is the pot of money that the South Carolina Department of Education manages, the ESSER funds. The amount that each state received was based on state Title I allocations. And under these ESSER funds, the Department of Education was awarded $216,311,158. Of that amount, the department has to subgrant 90% of the funds, or over $194 million, to school districts based on their proportion of Title I Part A funds from summer 2019. The department may reserve 10%, or about $21 million, for state-level activities, which we are referring to as the State Reserve ESSER funds. And we also may reserve, contained in that $21 million, half of 1%, or a little over $1 million, for the administrative costs of administering these ESSER funds and this ESSER program. The CARES Act also is allowing for pre-award expenses to be paid for beginning on and after March 13th, 2020. So if you have experienced or incurred costs as related to COVID-19 on or after March 13, 2020, you can use subgranted funds to pay for those costs. And lastly, the grant expires September 30th, 2022, which is just about 28 months from today. As I mentioned, the department had to submit an application to the U.S. Department of Education, so I wanted to take a brief moment and describe what we had to do in our application. We had to, of course, send forms which included a cover sheet, programmatical, fiscal, reporting assurances, and other assurances and certification. We had to provide a brief narrative describing district subgrant applications, as well as describing the extent to which funds will be used for technology and access and remote learning. By June 30th, at the end of this month, we must submit a budget for our state reserve funds, as well as a description of our internal controls and subrecipient monitoring. And then we have to begin reporting by the 10th date of each calendar quarter, the first of which is July 10, 2020, to the U.S. Department of Education on the use of these funds. We had to assure technical assistance to school districts on the use of funds for remote learning, including distance education and distance learning. We had to, in our application, ensure that district applications include a GEPA statement. And the GEPA statement is just the steps the district proposes to take to permit students, teachers, and other beneficiaries to overcome barriers that impede equal access to or participation in subgrant-funded activities. We also had to ensure districts complete required equitable services to students and teachers in participating nonprofit, non-public schools within their geographic jurisdiction. And we will say more about that as we go along. With our state reserve, which is the 10% that we are setting aside at the department, we may use those funds for subgrants or subcontracts for statewide needs or activities related to or caused by COVID-19. We're working with the governor's office related to their GEAR funds, as well as the $1.9 billion, the coronavirus relief funds. And we've been surveying districts on various needs to inform how we may spend our 10%. Really what we're looking at doing here is working to make sure that we are ensuring that our state level funds are spent to maximize our needs, not duplicate how other funds may be spent. As far as subgrants to school districts of these ESSER funds, the amount that each district is receiving is based in proportion to the most recent Title I Part A subgrant. Some weeks ago, we posted the district allocation amounts online, and you can access it on our main ESSER, CARES Act ESSER webpage. But it was in proportion to the amount they received under Title I Part A last summer. So, for example, if a district received 5% of our total Title I Part A flow-through, they would receive 10% of these ESSER funds. Our subgrants to school districts require equitable participation of non-public schools with that meaningful consultation, and more information will be forthcoming in this presentation about that. Our subgrants must require that districts must, quote, to the greatest extent practicable, end quote, continue to pay district employees and contractors during periods of any closure. And lastly, although the calculation for how districts got their allocation was based on Title I, that's where the comparison ends. This money is not solely for Title I schools or students living in poverty. This is to address the needs of students and districts and faculty as it relates to COVID-19. So there's no restriction on limiting this just to Title I schools or students. With respect to district funds, there are 12 areas of allowable uses. We have been affectionately referring to these as buckets at the department. So any federal program allowable activity is allowed as one of the 12 areas or 12 buckets for which funds may be spent. IDEA, Adult Ed and Family Literacy, Perkins, McKinney-Vento Homeless. Districts may also spend their ESSER subgrant money to coordinate emergency responses, address the needs of highly vulnerable populations, so for example, children in foster care, other children who are homeless, have disabilities, who are English learners, who may be highly mobile. They can be used to support school leaders and school needs. They may be used to ensure preparedness and coordination of systems and procedures. The funds may be used for training related to infectious diseases. They may be used to purchase cleaning supplies to sanitize and to clean schools. They may be used for planning or coordinating for continued education during long-term closures, purchase educational technology, providing mental health supports, expanding or offering summer learning, or other activities to ensure the continuity of education and employment. And you see I have an asterisk beside number 12 because I want to say a few more words about it. Before I proceed, though, it's really important to underscore these are the 12 allowable uses of funds. Districts and subgrantees are not required to use or to spend and budget and spend money in all 12 categories. Districts can pick one category or one allowable use. They can pick all 12. That really is left up to the needs of the district on which of these 12 allowable areas the district budgets and spends their money on. What is not allowed is spending ESSER funds on something that is not within these 12 allowable areas. We do have online detailed descriptions, more information about these 12 specific categories that you can access and see more information about and see the specific language from the CARES Act law. I now want to talk a little bit about that 12th bucket in terms of some special guidance. As we think about providing equitable services for participating nonprofit, non-public schools, we are going to ask that districts budget their estimate amount of equitable services in this 12th funding area. So provide an estimate, build that budget in that 12th allowable area for equitable services. Below that budget, as you'll see later in today's presentation, we ask for a dollar amount for you to provide. What are you estimating that proportionate share to be? And ask that you will add that to the budget. We recognize it is an estimate, and we have been working with several private school home associations to get some more estimate numbers. Okay, and I realized that I needed to sync, and hopefully you are seeing now the 12th allowable area special guidance. In addition, we ask that we certainly understand the unknowns and the changing dynamics brought about by COVID-19. So we're going to ask that you use the 12th category to budget any unknown amounts. We don't know what we don't know at this point. So if there is amounts from your allocation you really are not sure how you're going to spend yet, budget it in that 12th category, and then as you go along and need to revise your budget, you can do so at that point. As far as the district applications, what you will hear more about as we go along, we'll be asking for typical district information, name, superintendent. We will ask that you provide for one or more of the 12 allowable uses, whichever that you decide to spend your money on, a description, very brief, a few sentences about the planned uses of funds, and we'll ask that that be provided by function and object codes. We'll ask that you provide a description of how your needs were determined. How did you determine which of those 12 buckets and how you're spending your money? This may sound familiar in terms of a needs assessment, but we really want it to be brief. We're going to ask that you have a timeline, which is on this as 2 bullets in error. We'll ask that you provide the extent to which the funds will be used to address learning gaps to support remote learning. We will ask that you provide us an FTE equivalence as of March 2020. That's because beginning quarterly, you have to report to us, and then we to the U.S. Department of Education, the number of jobs retained or created as a result of these funds. And lastly, whether or not you are seeking pre-award reimbursement. That is, reimbursement for funds that you may have occurred between March 13th and June 30th. As we will say several times in today's presentation, if you are looking for pre-award expenses or pre-award reimbursement, we encourage you to move swiftly in getting an application into us so that we can approve it and get you a grant award notification because we are nearing the end of the state fiscal year. Your application will consist basically of the following: an online form that's being provided through FormStack, and on that we will ask that you provide some information as well as some documents to attach. We'll also ask that you attach a spending plan, that is how you're going to budget and spend the money. We'll ask that you include a certification page that does require a signature, and then we will ask that you include a GEPA statement, which we mentioned a minute ago. Once we receive your application, and assuming that everything is complete and we can approve, you will then be awarded a grant award notification. You must sign and return that grant award notification for full approval. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a moment because I think you're seeing a different slide. Let me hit sync again. I apologize, everyone, at technical difficulties. Okay, hopefully now you're seeing a slide called Grant Awards and Assurances. Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for letting me know that. Once you get the grant award notification, you must sign and return for that full approval. After that, you will use GAPS for budgeting and for payment, and our Office of Finance will be reviewing and approving budgets when submitted, assuming that your GAPS budget matches the budget in the summary budget in the spending plan, which we will talk about as we go forward. Districts will have certain reporting requirements to the SCDE, and we must then report to the United States Department of Education. And finally, as typical with all federal funds, we will be required to monitor the use of these funds. As I mentioned earlier, pre-award expenses may be paid for on and after March 13th, 2020, and again, it is imperative that districts apply quickly if you are seeking those pre-award expenses as the state fiscal year ends June 30th. And we will have until September 30th, 2022 to obligate and expend these funds. As is with all federal funds, those funds must be reasonable, allowable, and allocable. And these funds are emergency relief monies, not stimulus money. Funds cannot be used for bonuses, merit pay, or similar expenditures unless it's related to disruptions or closures related to COVID-19, subsidizing or offsetting executive salaries and benefits of individuals who are not district employees, or expenditures related to state or local teacher or faculty unions or associations. It's important to underscore, too, that the supplement, not supplant provision that typically applies to federal funds does not apply to these ESSER dollars. However, districts should ensure that the funds are spent on activities related to, caused by, or impacted by COVID-19. In terms of our management plan, we have a three-phase management plan. We have been working very busily in planning. We are now in the part of awarding and rolling out funds, and that will be followed by monitoring and reporting. We have created three internal teams. Our core team that is reporting directly to the state superintendent, a state reserve team who is developing our state reserve budget, and lastly, an application and monitoring team who are going to assist in reviewing and expeditiously approving your application, as well as monitoring when we get there down the road. We have a dedicated CARES Act ESSER webpage as resources, and I encourage you to visit that information. We're also providing as a resource to you the link to the U.S. Department of Education's ESSER webpage. There are some frequently asked questions there. And last but not least, we have created a dedicated email account for ESSER-related questions. And that email address is scesser@ed.sc.gov. scesser@ed.sc.gov. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kathy Hazelwood, our General Counsel in our Division of Legal Services, to talk to you about program requirements.
Thank you, John. I hope everyone can hear me. Please, somebody say they can hear me in the chat box. I apologize if you are going to hear this again, since we had the hiccup in the morning session. But if you did hear me in the morning session, you heard me say that repetition will be good for you and all things CARES Act related. So let's start and begin a review. What you'll learn today is the purpose of the subgrant, what's required of you, what's required in the application, what is required of us as the granting agency, subgranting agency rather, and your quarterly reporting items. And all of these will be explained further. Certainly the quarterly reporting items will be explained further in the sessions following mine, the application items, and the instructions as well. I've got to stop reading the chats. I'm going to tell you that right now. I keep looking down there, and then I get worried, and I'm going to stop reading them. So I apologize. A disclaimer, this is not, I am, as a lawyer, I am not giving you any legal advice. You need to read everything. You need to be clear about the assurances and terms and conditions and the federal regulations, etc. But this is a high-level overview of what is required of you. The purpose, as you learned from John's overview, the department has approximately $194 million in emergency relief funds to subgrant to you. And those subgrants need, in your use of those subgrants, you need to address the impact that COVID-19 has had, what the pandemic has had in your public schools, public education, and what it will continue to have when we return for summer school and summer reading camps and again in the fall. That is the thrust of it, that it is emergency, not stimulus, but emergency. In the purpose of the subgrant includes two items. One, to continue providing educational services. We cannot throw our hands up, as some states did when schools closed, and provided no services. So you've got to consider how you will provide remote learning, face-to-face or blended if schools are open or if schools are closed, as well as how do you return to school in the fall or for summer school as well, summer reading camps. So you've got those two purposes. As we noted earlier, these are not stimulus funds. They are emergency funds. Because they are emergency, you can request reimbursement for any allowable expenditures dating back to the date that the federal emergency order went into effect, which is March 13th, 2020. However, there are strings attached to using these subgrant funds, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. First, a reminder and a request. I do think this is a funny slide. So during the pandemic, you've probably been hearing this repeated more often. It's not just Silicon Valley that is flying the plane while building it these days. I'm including this to remind you that the CARES Act is a new law that was rushed out in time of emergency. The U.S. Department of Ed is still figuring it out. As a result, we are still figuring it out. And I've said a million times, if I've said it once, there are so many moving parts. And when somebody makes a new decision, new instructions, new interpretation, then we have to make the adjustment. So oftentimes you're asking questions we don't know the answer to. We haven't even contemplated the question you're asking. So that would lead us to the next slide. Our request is that you please be patient. You will get the funds, but you do have to apply, and there are specific things that you will need to do and provide in your application. We'll go over them today at a high level in my presentation and in much more detail in the ladies following me, or the folks following me. Please be patient because you will probably hear the same message repeated at different times during these presentations. Again, repetition is helpful. Specific program assurances. Program-specific assurances. You, in order to receive, when you receive your subgrant, you need to ensure to the greatest extent practicable that you continue to employ your employees and your contractors. So you will, as you know, state government has done the same thing. We have continued to employ all state employees. That is the presumption in this money coming to the districts, that you will continue to employ teachers, staff, whatever other terms you use for those folks, and the contractors. That's a wrinkle I'm not super sure about, but that language is in two separate places to compensate employees and contractors. That's during any disruption or closure related to COVID-19, and that you will continue to pay employees and contractors to the greatest extent practicable, based on your unique financial circumstances. Again, we don't know what we don't know. As we know, at the moment, we are under a continuing resolution in preparation for the 2020-2021 budget. So we don't know what the 21 budget will look like, but we're waiting. So that may create a unique financial circumstance. It'd be wonderful if the USCD, or rather Congress, or even the USCD could come back with some definitions and define what is to the greatest extent practicable, but I would not hold my breath about that. What John has already shared What you cannot use these funds for, they cannot be used to subsidize or offset salaries or benefits who are not employees. I don't even know who those are. I would imagine if you are a contract superintendent, but that would be rather problematic on any number of levels. And then secondly, the expenditures to faculty unions. We don't have those, and I'm unaware of any district that is paying dues to the SCEA or the Palmetto Teachers Association. But if you are, do not use any CARES fund, ESSER funds for that. Here's a pretty significant wrinkle to the CARES Act, to the ESSER funds. You will have to provide equitable services to any nonprofit, non-public school within your district, to the students and teachers, equitable services. So it's not those students, Title I students. It is to any nonprofit, non-public school student and teacher in your geographical area. You must provide an estimate of the proportional share that you anticipate setting aside for this requirement, and that is a bit of a cumbersome calculation, if you will. We are gathering as complete a list of private schools in the state for the districts. The list that we had was certainly incomplete from self-reporting. We are in communication with 3 of the larger associations that non-profit, non-public schools. So I do want that to be very clear. Non-profit, non-public schools. They didn't say private schools. They said non-profit, or the statute or legislation provides non-profit, non-public. I'm going to say private from here on out because I get tongue twisted every time. The private schools within your district. So I'm going to do very simple math. And nobody's getting a small amount, but if you are receiving $100,000 under your ESSER subaward, and you have determined based on your estimate of the number of participating private school students in your district that you need to set aside 10%, then that's what you'll do. You'll set aside $10,000. You'll spend $90,000, and then you will set aside $10,000 to provide those equitable services. I wish it was that simple of math. It is not that simple. The next, in order to provide equitable services, you, the district, must maintain control of the funds. There is no check being written to the private school. You do not say, man, it would be so much easier if I just cut a check to the school. You do not do that. You must maintain control of the funds. You must maintain control of any, if you will, real property purchased with those monies. So if there are computers, if there are textbooks, if there are tablets, manipulatives, I don't know what else there might be. Those are your property. They are the district's property, and you will need to maintain them in your inventory. They do not become the property of the private school. You provide the services, we're saying services, and that's what it tends to be, as you tend, historically it appears that you provide training to staff, training to the teachers. At least that's all I've heard about so far. So you could provide them directly. You could provide those services. If you're going to do professional development, you're going to do technology training on how best to provide remote learning, that you could do that directly to the private school teachers, or you could through a contract with another or public or private entity. Your evidence that you have done this, because this is something that we will ensure, it's one of the major checkoffs for us, if you will, that you have done your meaningful consultation. You will have done your meaningful consultation, and that you will complete the form and submit it to us, the non-public schools consultation form, to us by July 31st. So that is an important deadline. It's not the first deadline coming up, but it's getting there. Pooling. Hold on. Pooling equitable services is an option. So, and many of you may already be familiar with this, that you have pooled equitable services before in your district. You may have pooled it with these groups that I'm talking about, these organizations that private schools belong to, be it the Catholic Diocese or SCISA or some other, the Christian Association of Schools, I can't remember the name of it. So that's one way. You have, let's, again, really low-level math here. You're a school district with 10 private schools, and you are able, after meaningful consultation and agreement, you determine that the 10 schools want to get together and have combined equitable services. So that happens. You can pool that, each of those schools, 10 schools, you're the 100,000, you got 10,000, each of them should have $1,000 for their equitable services. They decide to pool their money for one as a group. That's acceptable. The other way is LEAs. So there are 10 LEAs in close proximity, and they want to pool their equitable percentage allocation, equitable services allocation, and they want to pool that money to provide. Either of those scenarios can happen, but they happen after consultation and agreement. You cannot push this down to the private school. You can't make the decision and say, we're going to do this. There has to be meaningful consultation and then an agreement. What happens if there is no agreement? In the case of no agreement, then you will submit your, any dispute about the equitable services will need to be facilitated by Teresa Gregory, and that information is there. She is our equitable services ombudsperson, so she'll handle any dispute that might occur. So that information will be provided to you. Other requirements. Other regulations are applicable to this subgrant, and these will be in Section 11, applicable regulations of your subaward document. I'm just presenting these. I'm not going to go over them because you should review and understand them. They're not new to federal direct grant program subgrants. These are your standard federal requirements for a federal grant. Depending on how you choose to use the funds, other program-specific federal regulations may apply, including IDEA regulations, adult ed, Perkins, McKinney-Vento. So one of the 12 buckets we've been talking about is providing additional services under special education. And then, so you need to take the deep dive into the IDEA regs if that's where you're going to allocate your money. You need to be quite aware of that. If you're going to do homeless, you're going to attempt to close the gap in homeless, then you need to take a deep dive into McKinney-Vento. Next. As John noted, Tidings Amendment does apply, so these funds are available to you until September 30th, 2022, but honestly, why would you take that long to spend emergency funds? I honestly hope that we are not beating the bushes come August of 2022 calling districts to say, why haven't you spent your ESSER funds? That's really not going to be great if that's what we're doing. You didn't have a really good plan, unfortunately, if that's what we're doing. So we have Tidings, we have the SED assurances and terms and conditions for federal subawards. Those are the promises, if you will, that we make to the feds when they awarded us the $216 million, and now we're going to subaward 90% of it. And then the program-specific assurances in prior slides, such as equitable services, such as maintaining your employment. So, required application items. Now I'm going to provide you some specifics you'll have to provide in your district's application. Ooh, went too fast, trigger finger. The key term here is brief. You will not have a lot of space to provide your rationale and descriptions, so work on these. Make them succinct and to the point. So you've got to look at what are the educational needs. Important educational needs as a result of COVID-19. I imagine that there are a multitude, but you are going to have to sit down and determine what are the most important. Most important. How are you going to promote, how are you going to use this money to promote remote learning, distant learning, e-learning, and how you are going to, a brief description on addressing the learning gaps. This is not an essay. No one's getting an A+ because they, writing a 500-page epistle on this. It is, when you see the application, you will see just how brief it is. So be aware of that. Next is your spending plan. You'll get quite a bit more information on the contents of the spending plan and other required uploads this afternoon, but I'm going to share them with you now. We keep talking about those 12 buckets. Bucket 1 has 4 things in it, but 12 buckets. If you decide to do something in all 12 buckets, can't wait to read your application. But you will have to describe each. You'll have to have a plan for each. And as John said, they have to be an allowable activity. And then what your overall budget is. There is a certification plan, a certification signature page, which includes all the requisite assurances, and then a GEPA statement. Also, you have, this is so important, an individual question, a specific yes or no question on whether you are going to be requesting funds for prior expenditures. Are you going to be asking to be reimbursed for something that has occurred since March 13th? That is a specific question because we want to approve those applications as quickly as possible to ensure that you make the fiscal year. We know that the clock is ticking on that, so please be aware of that. Then there's a timeline each quarter. We've provided you a timeline so you can think about when you're going to be able to implement your plan, if you will, and draw down the funds to make those plans a reality. And then a brief description. I can't stress enough, though, think about, and you know this as well, the fiscal year is winding down. And if you want that reimbursement, then you're going to have to jump on this. And that's the last time I'll talk about it. The LEA assurances, these are your promises. By signing the signature certification form, you attest to the program-specific assurances we've already reviewed, the agency's assurances and terms and conditions for terms and conditions for federal subawards, and these, which pertain both to overall compliance with the full terms of the subgrant and continuing to compensate employees and contractors to the greatest extent practicable. Also note that the False Claim Act is applicable to the misuse of these funds, so fraud, waste, and abuse, don't do it. You need to be mindful of that. Our assurances, this is what you need to understand, that the items and the application and the spending plan are dictated to what we had to ensure in receiving the state's CARES Act ESSER funds grant. That's a mouthful. What this is really saying is we didn't make this stuff up. We didn't sit we never sat in a room together anyway, but we went, we got $216 million, and at one point I thought we were going to meet for 216 million minutes to get this money out. It just feels like that's how many minutes we met to do this. But every conversation was, is what we're asking required by the law? Is what we're asking required by regulation? Is what we're asking required by the application that we have to submit? So we started that conversation. We didn't say, you know what, we really would like to know exactly down to the second. We do want an essay on everything you're going to do. No, everything can be tied back to something in the CARES Act or to standard federal regulations, our assurances, terms, and conditions. So there's nothing in this that wasn't required by law. Nothing in here that's not required by the law. So we have to ensure that your activities are allowable, that you provide equitable services, and that you continue to compensate employees and contractors. Those are our three. That's what we promised, what Molly promised when she signed our grant, our application for the $216 million. Here's part of Molly's assurance. This language will look familiar when you see your signature certification page for your application. As a pass-through entity, we, the department, have to pass through the assurances for the use of these funds to you as the LEA applicant, as our districts. And just an aside, as the person who communicates with all LEAs about their SAM.gov registration, this has come full circle for me. You must be in good standing with SAM.gov because the state superintendent assured the USED that you would be, or we wouldn't award you the subgrant. We have an obligation to ensure that you are in good standing, which I do every 2 weeks to make sure that you can continue to receive your federal funding. But we have a full circle there. Just briefly on quarterly reporting, they are due. Please note that the reporting deadline will be different from all of your other federal subawards. And sorry about that. We can't help it. It is the way the CARES Act is written that we, the SEA, the department, must report on the 10th day after the quarter. So in order to ensure that we make the 10th day deadline, we have given you 5 days to report to us. So your first report is July 5th. If you don't file your application until after June 30th, then you won't have that filing requirement, and your first filing requirement will be the Equitable Service Meaningful Consultation Report. But if you do draw down before June 30th, then you will have a July 5th report. And the report, you'll get much more information about what you're going to be reporting, but again, you're going to describe briefly on how your funds were used, how much money was drawn down, the actual expenditures as opposed to what you had thought you would spend in your spending plan. And then again, we keep circling back to the estimated number of jobs created and retained. Are you maintaining full employment? This is just an overview, and you are going to get much more information in the afternoon. We are in the afternoon shortly. If you have any questions, again, you've got more information coming, more presenters shortly. John gave you the ESSER email address. It's here again. We monitor the ESSER email account and answer questions from it. So please use it if you have questions. And this concludes my portion, and I'll return you to our facilitator. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We will now turn this over to Audrey Sheflett, the Director of South Carolina Department of Education, Office of Grants.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you would like to take a moment just to stand up. I know you've been attached to your computer for quite a while now. If you can also just raise your hand, let me know if you're hearing me well. Wonderful. As Carolyn mentioned, I'm Audrey Shiflett with the Grants Program here at the South Carolina Department of Education. Joining me today for this presentation is Stephen Stokes, our Grants Coordinator. We will be sharing with you some information to get you prepared for the application document that will be made available on our website, and I'll show you where that is in just a moment. It will go live following this technical assistance session. So our objectives are to help you get organized and to think about the things that you need to include in your application before you go and start your form. As you've seen from Kathy and John's presentations, there are a lot of things to think about in how you plan to use these funds. And then Stephen's going to give you some guidance on how to properly submit your application. So the first thing to remember is that the State Department of Education posts all of its available grant opportunities on the SCDE's Grant Opportunities webpage, which is accessible from the home page, always under Hot Topics. Depending on what other hot topics are available at the time, it may be third, like it is on this slide. It may be top, it may be bottom, it may be somewhere, but it will be in that Hot Topics block from the main web page. When you click on it, you'll go to the Overall Grant Opportunities web page, where you will be able to select the South Carolina Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Subgrant for 2020. When you click on that hyperlink, it will take you to the specific web page for this opportunity, and everything that you need to complete your application will be listed on this web page, including the necessary forms that you're going to need to access and complete. I will take you through a few of those, and the application form that Stephen will guide you through in just a few minutes. So I want to encourage you that before you begin looking at those forms, please read the application guidance. The application guidance will be in 2 documents. There is Application Guidance Part 1, which will be the purpose of the program and all requirements, the things that you need to understand that you're required to do in accepting this money. Application Guidance Part 2 will be instructions for completing the attachments and the online application form. Both of those documents are important, so we encourage you to read them thoroughly before you begin your application, and then follow those to ensure that you are completing the application correctly, and there won't be any hold-ups with us reviewing and approving your application. So I would encourage you to complete the spending plan first. It will be an attachment, as Stephen will show you. But right now I'm going to walk you through the components in the spending plan so you can go ahead and be thinking about those. The spending plan will begin with a front page in which you will select your district from a drop-down, and you will include the total number of employees in full-time equivalency as of March 13th, 2020, when the national emergency order went into effect. As Kathy explained, we have to report on the full-time equivalencies that have been continued or supported with subgrant funds. So we need a number from you in your application. The next section of the first part of the spending plan is for your superintendent's information. Please be sure that you enter the email address correctly. And then the next section is where you will provide a brief rationale about how your district determined the most important educational needs of the district as a result of COVID-19. In the next section of the form, you will enter a description of how the funds will be used to promote remote learning. Recall from Kathy's presentation that this is required in the federal law. Likewise, the next section of the spending plan is where you will indicate how your district intends to address learning gaps that resulted from the disruption of educational services due to COVID-19. Likewise, this is a requirement of the CARES Act ESSER funds law. And then at the bottom of this first section of the form is an attestation for an electronic signature of the superintendent. From this part of the form, you will advance to entering specific spending plan information for any of those 12, but actually 16 or so allowable uses of funds, the things that John and Kathy referred to as the buckets of allowable uses of funds, those 12 overarching groups. So what you're seeing on the slide right now is the top of the page of the section for 1A, which is the first allowable use of funds. If you're going to use any of your subgrant funds to supplement your IDEA service to individuals with disabilities. So at the top of the page, you will select your school district name from a drop-down, and then in the middle of the page, you will insert the description of your activities for which you're proposing to use your subgrant funds. And as Kathy mentioned, we would like you to keep these descriptions brief and succinct. As you see, there's not a lot of space there. The text box will expand a bit, but think about how you can just be succinct with your statements. And then the next section of the spending plan, I'm advanced to give you a bit closer look at it. For those activities that you've described, you will enter a budget and budget information both by function and object code. And you'll see some are pre-populated there. Also note the column to the right before the total column. Please indicate if you are proposing to use funds for any expenses that you have already incurred. And as Kathy mentioned, those can date back to March 13th, 2020. And yes, indirect costs are allowable. There will be a place for you to enter that. At the end of the spending plan, after you have completed all the individual spending plan pages based on how you and your district are proposing to use the funds, there will be a budget summary that will auto-populate from the separate plans that you have entered. So you'll see in this one, we've given an example as a mock-up of how it might look. Again, you will choose your LEA name from the top. And at the bottom, under allocation amount, you will go to the table of allocations that's on the ESSER fund page, or you can check the table that's in the back of the application guidance documents. We've provided that for you to get the specific amount that will be awarded to your school district and enter it in this allocation amount. Once you do that, the remaining balance must be 0 for you to be able to submit this form. We've given you the example here without anything entered in allocation amount, so you can see what a negative looks like. You will have to get this balanced for you to be able to submit it. Once you get it to 0, then your spending plan is completed, and you should save that and have it available, because that will be an attachment in the online application form, and Stephen will show you that in a few minutes. But before we get to Stephen's part, I'll let you know 2 other things that you need to prepare, again, before going to the online form. The next thing is a GEPA statement, a General Education Provisions Act statement. For those of you who have worked with federal subgrants, you're aware of this, that anyone applying for federal funds, federal grant funds, has to provide a GEPA statement which provides your plan for addressing accessibility issues related to barriers that can impede equitable access or participation. There are instructions included in both sets of application guidance. In the Part 1, it's on page 17. In Part 2, it's on page 16. And yes, we have made all required forms available in both documents, so you will be sure and have those. So for a GEPA statement, you need to identify at least one barrier that would prevent someone from participating in your subgrant activities. And then you have to explain what you will do to overcome that barrier to help someone participate fully in your subgrant activities. We have here at least one, but it's preferable that you address the different ways that you're going to be using funds and potential barriers, just to demonstrate to us and to a potential federal auditor that you've thought about how you're going to address barriers. And this must align with your proposed uses of funds for this subgrant. You can't just pull a GEPA statement that you have used in the past for a different subgrant or a different direct federal grant and present that as your plan. It needs to tie to this plan for this subgrant. The next thing that will be an attachment is the certification signature page. This is the document that binds your district to the agency's assurances and terms and conditions and the program-specific assurances that Kathy talked about for this particular subgrant. We will have two ways that you can provide this certification signature page. It is included in the back of both Part 1 and Part 2 of the application guidance documents. Those are Word documents, so you can print out that page and have your superintendent sign it and scan and PDF that document to upload, or there will be an electronic form on the grant opportunities page for this subgrant opportunity that you can access and fill out electronically and have the superintendent electronically sign that document. That document will be a PDF form that you can also upload. I just want to make you aware that both are available, but please only use one. We only need one certification signature page, but we do need that page. Your application is not complete without it, and it will be returned to you for you to include that document. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Stephen, who will give you more information about the online application form.
All right. Well, thank you, Audrey. So today I'm going to kind of highlight some of the details about going online and actually submitting your application. And it's important to note that this comes after what Audrey just talked about, because really the first thing you want to do is get all the pieces organized, really wrap your head around the application guidance, some of the other things we talked about today, and create a central grant file with every member of your team so that you got all the pieces that you need prior to going online and submitting your application. So it is important. I want you guys to know and to understand what this is, but this will be a piece that you'll probably use a little bit later on in your process for applying for these funds. So the online application consists of three main parts. That's the online forms section, the timeline of activities, as well as the proposal attachments. I'm going to take a closer look at these three sections. So here's a screenshot from the online application, and the first entry field you'll select is your district or your school from the drop-down menu. And then underneath that, you're going to enter your DUNS number in that space provided. Real important that the organization name you enter here also matches your registered DUNS name. If you're not familiar with that, it's unique 9-digit identifier. If you need to get your DUNS number, you can contact your finance office, but it's something that is required in all federal grant applications, and you should be familiar with that, or your finance office will definitely be. So the contact information is below that, and this is where you'll enter the superintendent's name and all important point of contact information. So this includes the position title of that person, the phone number, and the email address. You'll note that the email address needs to be entered twice, because this is a way of validating your submission. All the contact, the emails, submissions, and confirmations will be sent to that email address. It's absolutely critical that that email address is correct. And you also see a question at the bottom there that says indicate whether or not the application includes pre-award expenses or expenses already incurred. So please click yes or no, because that helps us as we are coming through these after you have made submissions. So next we have is the timeline of activities. And so this is an idea where we want to get sort of a projection of the activities and when those activities are going to take place throughout the course of this grant. So under timeline of activities, we want you to select the time frame that applies to the use of these funds. So you'll see that in that particular set of funds, please select all of the time frames that are going to you apply for those. And each time you select a box, another like a description box will pop up, and you'll type in there, tell us what those planned activities are, and let us know kind of a short and a brief description of what those planned activities are. And you can see an example here from March 13th, which is the first time, the first section, first quarter, I guess you could say, although it's not full quarter, but from March 13th to June 30th, what would be the activities that you have already incurred and that you expect to be reimbursed for, or also maybe the ones that are coming up this month. You list those in that box. And again, each time you click on one of these, it will a new box will pop up and allow you to enter activities for that particular time frame. Finally, you see the attachments, and this attachment section, you're going to have three different things that we've all spoken about that Audrey just mentioned. You have the spending plan, the certification signature page, and the GEPA statement. So this is where you will upload those. Again, you should have all, by the time you go online and start working with this portion, you're going to already have that spending plan done, or at least you should, as well as the signature certification page and your GEPA statement. So this is just a matter of pulling those documents and attaching them here into the application. There is a limit to the total combined size. Now these attachments are fairly small, so there should be no issues with this, but please do not add anything that is unnecessary or something that we are not asking for. Particularly, there shouldn't be any reason to add pictures, but total file size of your attachments is limited to 25 megabytes. So just make sure that it's all black and white and nothing unnecessary graphics and so forth. And that shouldn't be a problem in terms of your attachment file size. If you do have an issue, there's some contact information at the end of this. You can always reach out to us, and we can give you some suggestions on reducing the file size and try and get that fixed. Here's the attestation, and so here's where you'll provide the electronic signature of the district superintendent or authorized official. You just type that in and also select the date that you're submitting the form there, just right next to it. Once you have submitted your application, you're going to receive an on-screen confirmation, and that looks like it's the one on the right, actually. The top right, you'll see that screen says, "Thank you, your form was submitted successfully." And then the contact person that you listed earlier in this application will receive a confirmation email with an attached PDF, and that's really handy because that attached PDF, and I'll show you in a second, it'll have all the data that you submitted as a part of this application. It'll look like this. So this will be sort of a great record of everything you put into your application. I suggest you save an electronic copy and also print out a copy and save that for your records. Okay, so if there are any questions about the online submission process or anything like that I haven't touched on, or if you have any more questions, you're welcome to type those in the chat box, and we're going to be developing an FAQ and trying to respond as quickly and efficiently as we can to some of your questions. And at this point, I am going to turn that back over to our facilitator, and we will be moving on with the next speaker.
Stephen, I think Carolyn is busy at the moment, so I will go ahead and introduce the next speaker as Diane House, who is our Grants Accounting Manager. And take it away, Diane.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Diane, and you can always ask me for any GAPS-related questions about the ESSER grant. And we're going to go through a few things right now. We're trying to help you understand the differences in the normal grants that you run through GAPS and the ones for ESSER. And there's some changes, reporting requirements. You don't normally have to report to us in Grants Accounting, the finance section. You don't have to report to us, but this time you do with this grant, and we'll go over a little bit more of that later. If you're not familiar with GAPS, it's the Grants Accounting Processing System. It's what we use to meet our recording requirements and retention and auditor expectations. It reduces our fraud and abuse and enhances our transparency. It's just our system that we use. Okay, so before you can get any money from us in Grants Accounting, you have to get your grant award notification fully executed. So that means that you have to have the superintendent sign your GAN, your grant award notification, and return the signed GAN to this email address, cesser@ed.sc.gov. And then your LEA needs to retain the copy that has both signatures for your records. Then once you have your approved spending plan and you have your signed GAN, you can begin to create a budget in GAPS. Now that budget has to match your approved spending plan summary page. And if you'll notice when Audrey was going through your spending plan, your budgets are all going to be at the high level function and object codes. You know, 100, 200, 300, 400. There's no 102s or 202s, or it's all at the high level. So when you have submitted your budget in GAPS to SCDE, it's going to be a little different because there's not a program office because this covers so many programs. So we in Grants Accounting are going to be reviewing your GAPS budget to ensure that it matches what your approved spending plan summary page is. And this is an example of the summary page. And Audrey had hers filled out. So whatever you have in there should match the budget that you put in GAPS that you submit to us. Okay. Once we get your budget in GAPS, we're going to verify that we at SCDE, that we have your signed GAN, that your spending plan has been reviewed and it's approved, and then we're going to make sure that that spending plan matches exactly what you entered into GAPS budget. If it does, then we will approve it, and you should get an email telling you that your budget's been approved and you can now begin your claims process. If there's something wrong with your budget in GAPS, then we will send you an email, and also we will send John in his program office an email that tells you what is wrong with your GAPS budget so you can quickly correct it. But it has to match your spending plan summary, and you have to budget all of your allocation before you can do any claims. Okay, and once your budget is approved, as you've heard numerous times today, you can start submitting claims, and they can date as far back as March 13th, 2020. We would ask if you have any of these claims to please get them in as quickly as possible, because we're going to try to push to meet this year-end deadline. You can draw down requests for advance payments if you have an anticipated obligation, like a purchase order that you're going to get in the next week, and you can request the funds in advance. but you should make sure that you're going to spend these funds in a reasonable amount of time if you ask for an advance payment. And our process is the same as it's always been with GAPS. Our request, we will process all your requests for the week on a Monday morning, and it will pay out to you on Wednesday. You've got to remember that the subgrant is for emergency funds, not stimulus. And you heard about that earlier. Now, the Cash Management Act applies to this grant. So you need to be careful how you request your funds and expend them. Because the Cash Management Improvement Act requires that you minimize the time between transfer of federal funds and disbursement and use of those funds. Now, I don't have a good definition for the time, what it means to minimize the time, but I would assume within a week you should spend that money. You also need to look at CFR Part 200-305, and that explains more about the Cash Management Improvement Act. You also need to update or look at your LEA, look at your district's cash management procedures, and you might need to add something to specifically address this ESSER subgrant to show that you are allowed advance payments. Don't forget, update your procedures. And finance managers, we're urging you to monitor the request to make sure that you are using those funds in a timely manner, that what you're requesting is really needed for current, payments. This is the part that is different with this grant for the grants accounting section. You have to report to us quarterly, and you have to report the amount of the funds expended for each authorized activity at both the detail function and object level. You have to report the number of jobs created by the subgrant by allowable activity and the number of jobs sustained with the subgrants by allowable activity. Now, this is the difference. You normally have, 45 days to claim for the end of a quarter, but this is talking about what you spent in a quarter, what you asked for reimbursement for. So if you ask for reimbursement from us by June 30th, you need to report by July 5th what all of that request for reimbursement, all those claims included by activity. And we've got this reporting tool that we're working on still, but we will release it in the next week, hopefully, and it will help you be able to plug in these numbers. But remember, if you have expenditures in your fourth quarter, which is that March through June, and you don't request reimbursement for them by June 30th, then you still have until August 15th to request reimbursement for those expenses. Now, that is still a drop-dead date for any quarter four claims. But if you have requested reimbursement by June 30th, then you still have to report that amount by July 5th to us. And then after that, your next quarterly report will be due on October 5th, as you can see in this little slide here. And that's really all I have about the difference in GAPS and reporting. If you have any questions, you can always email me at grantsaccounting@ed.sc.gov, and I'll be happy to get back with you. That email account is monitored by 3 different people all day long, so someone will get with you very quickly. You can also email the SC ESSER account, scsser@ed.sc.gov. That's all I have right now, so I'll turn it back over to Carolyn.
Next, we will hear from Melissa Myers, Director of Office of Auditing Services.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to speak with you briefly about the audit preparation for the CARES Act funds. A lot of what I'm saying will be similar to what you have already heard earlier. But we have both state and federal audit requirements that require school districts to be audited every year. The state code of law requires that all school districts must submit an annual audit report to the Department of Education by December 1st after the close of each fiscal year. And then we have federal regulations that state that any non-federal entity that expends at least $750,000 in federal funds must have a single audit conducted for that year where they met that audit threshold. All South Carolina school districts meet the requirement to have a single audit conducted. And with a single audit, there's a combination of a financial audit along with the audit of federal programs that are determined to be major programs by the auditor in charge of the engagement. How do we determine the major federal programs? The auditor uses a risk-based approach to determine which federal programs are major programs. Risk factors include such items as the current and prior audit experience for a particular program. They will look to see how recently a federal program has been audited. If it has been audited more recently, what were those results of the prior audits? Were there significant deficiencies or material weaknesses noted for those programs? If so, then that would be an instance of a federal program being a high-risk program. Also, the auditor will look at oversight by federal agencies and pass-through entities. The U.S. Department or U.S. Office of Management and Budget may designate certain programs as being high-risk programs. And then there's an inherent risk of the federal program that the auditors will also look at just by the nature of the program, by looking at the phase of the program in its life cycle, such as is the program a relatively new program. Based on the risk factors that I just described in the previous slide, it is highly likely that the CARES Act ESSER program will be determined to be a major program for the majority of the LEAs for fiscal year 20 and subsequent fiscal years. If any funds are expended prior to June 30, 2020, those CARES Act ESSER funds could be subject or are subject to an audit during the fiscal year 1920 single audits. John talked earlier and Kathy about the pre-award call, saying that you could elect to expend or draw a claim for the money that was expended from March 13th to the end of the fiscal year. And if you do decide to do that, that pot of money could be subject to audit for the fiscal year 2020 fiscal year audits. So to prepare for your audits, ensure that your LEA complies with all the terms and conditions of the sub-grant award to avoid any potential audit findings during the fiscal year 1920 audit year and any subsequent single audits. John mentioned that these funds could be expended up through fiscal year September 2022. So for any fiscal year that you expend these funds, those funds are subject to audit by the independent auditors. The auditors will test the applicable compliance requirements that's found in the Office of Management and Budget Compliance Supplement for the CARES Act when performing the single audit. And some of the compliance requirements that I feel are going to be applicable to this program are activities allowed or unallowed. You heard again both John and Kathy earlier talk about those 12 buckets. So the auditors will look at those 12 buckets and ensure that the district expended money for what is allowable. Kathy had a list of unallowable expenditures that she went over. The auditors will ensure that the district did not expend money for any unallowable expenditures. If a district did expend money for unallowable expenditures, of course, that will result in audit finding and possible question calls. The allocable costs and cost principles. For this compliance requirement, the auditor will make sure that expenditures are specified and that they are allowable, and they will make sure that they are calculated and adequately supported. For cash management does apply. Again, with cash management, all your reimbursements should be properly supported by documentation. Diane just mentioned making sure that you minimize the time that elapsed between the drawdown and the expending of the funds. And per federal regulations, that period of time should be 72 hours. So advance payments are properly managed and funds are expended within 72 hours. The auditors would definitely check for that when doing the audit. For interest earned on payments in excess of $500, it must be remitted to the grantor. So again, let's repeat that. Any interest earned on payments in excess of $500 must be remitted to the grantor. Additional compliance requirements could be on equipment and real property management. For the management, use, and disposal of equipment or real property, we see that it is allowable for districts to use the CARES Act money for some equipment purchases. So again, the auditors will check for that to make sure that if you did, for instance, this is federal funds, so they will make sure that the asset is identified properly. Period of performance, then the auditors would check to ensure that expenditures are incurred within the grant period. So the 2020 OMB compliance supplement has not yet been published yet, but when it is published, you can review that to see what the specific compliance requirements that are going to be that the auditors will look at when testing the CARES Act program. I included the link here to the 2019 supplement, so you can just check that link from time to time and refresh it to look for the 2020 compliance supplement. So again, prepare for your audit. Make sure that you maintain all supporting documentation for expenditures that have been incurred. Ensure that your staff that's involved with expending the funds understand all allowable activities. Only draw down funds for activities that are allowable. Ensure that funds drawn down are spent within 72 hours and that you are not earning interest on this money. And again, any interest earned over $500 must be remitted to the grantor. And just also note that these independent audits that will be performed by your annual auditor are separate from monitoring visits that will be conducted by the SCDE as a pass-through entity. Just keep that in mind that you'll hear more about that later, but the SCDE is also going to monitor your expenditures of these funds in addition to the audits. So, are there any questions? Carolyn?
Okay, this is John instead of Carolyn before. So I want to thank all of you for participating this afternoon. For those of you who joined this morning amidst our technical difficulties, we do apologize for those. For those of you who were not able to join this morning, we hope that you were able to join this session. This online presentation will be published as soon as we can to our grants webpage where the application package information will be found, and within about 48 hours it will be closed captioned for folks who need that accommodation to access it. In addition, we will be posting the PowerPoint presentation shared along with the instructions that are detailed instructions from our grants office on specific information for applying for these. Lastly, we will have the grant application materials, which would be the link to the form stack and the additional documents that Ms. Shiflett and Mr. Stokes talked about today online as well. We are hoping that by about 6:00 p.m. tonight, Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020, that information will be live for you to access. Some of you have asked about a deadline. There is no deadline. However, if you are asking for pre-award expenses, again, please know that time is of the essence since we are just a few weeks away from the end of the state fiscal year. Submitting the application is the first step. We then would have to send you a grant award notification that you would sign and send back to us. Once we have a signed grant award, you then would have to budget in gaps, and only at that point can you ask for claims from our gaps system. So again, just to underscore how urgent it is if you are asking for pre-award expenses. We encourage you to visit our online resources and to submit any questions that you may have to the scesser@ed.sc.gov. Several of us from the department have been endeavoring to answer some of your questions as we go along, but your questions will assist in informing a frequently asked questions document that we will work on to post and keep updated. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you, more importantly, for everything that you have been doing and continue to do on behalf of South Carolina's children during this historic, unprecedented event. And Carolyn, with that, I will give it to you to conclude us.
This concludes this session. Thank you for joining the South Carolina Department of Education in the CARES Act ESSA Funding and Application Technical Assistance session. Again, please be sure to review all online resources and instructions. Thank you and have a great day.